Let's start a little bit with Brad and Denise. Look, Wells Fargo would round out this panel nicely. They received a fine for in excess of $1 billion this year. My boss spent a little vacation in Washington, D.C. With our friends in Capitol Hill. Digital has never been more in the spotlight. It's never been more in the throes of the controversy between risk and with marketing. I'm very curious, how have the two of you seen your priorities shift, in particular from last year to this year?
Yeah, well, I'll kick it off by saying that we're still doing everything that we've always done in terms of testing and learning, trying new media, being kind of first to embrace emerging media. But I'd say our processes have changed, and we've inserted steps into our thinking, into our process to say, you know, what's the worst possible thing that could happen before we put this piece of communication out there? And that's new. And we're the ones who are kind of front-running our compliance partners before we even show them anything to do that kind of test of, are we going to get in trouble? Are the consumers going to reject us? Could they misinterpret our communication? And just one quick example is we put a television spot on air, and we have one of our associates shooting a basket. And when she just kind of ad-libbed, and she kind of did this when she finished shooting the basket and got it in. And we got letters and emails and saying that, you know, gun violence today, like how can you have that depiction? You know, even when we go through that process of what's the worst possible thing, I still can't predict kind of some of the sensitivities out there, which are real. So we actually had to pull the ad. So things like that happen now that didn't happen before. So I'd say for me, it's changes in processes.
Yeah, I'd say a couple things similar along those lines. I think for us, you know, even before knowing the Wells case, you know, it's interesting coming from travel. Jane and I were speaking. I used to work at Expedia underneath Dara. And, you know, so much of the travel industry, and they often say that fintech is about 10 to 15 years behind, or at least in the marketplace side, travel. But so much of what we did was really driving towards outcomes in the marketplace. So as an example, on the customer side, Net Promoter Score, we can put a financial value behind that. In the case of our lender network, cost per funded loans. And, you know, one of the things I think I learned pretty quickly in the space is those things weren't necessarily front and center as I'd seen them before in travel. And so, you know, the Wells Fargo thing was actually timed nicely for some of the cultural changes we were trying to drive in the industry. But I'd say there's really two policy things that we did internally. So number one is, at least in the partner network in which we employed or worked with, we really started to make sure that those monetization metrics were front and center versus just say sort of the quarterly financials. And I think if you think specifically about the Wells situation, you know, a lot of that was employee behavior because that's what they were incented to do. So while we didn't have anybody acting poorly in that regard, we made sure that a lot of the incentives that our employees had basically didn't really account for kind of short-term financials. It was based on what's the quality of the lender network we're trying to achieve in the long run. So things like Net Promoter Score and cost per funded loan. Those were the two fundamental changes.
So this, if I'm kind of reading the tea leaves, this trend, is this a trend? Or is this a new normal? Is this going away? Are we in a blip? What does this mean for marketers?
I'll go first.
Sure.
You know, if you think about the commercial web for 20 years, you've always seen bad behavior, and it always gets weeded out, right? So I go back and I think about the portalization era, whether you had, you know, sort of the arbitrage content that lived in AOL and Yahoo, et cetera, Google, you know, sort of the incentive networks, and now in social media, which you have to deal with, you know, day in and day out, clickbait and things of that nature. People always find a way to act poorly, but in short order, through technology and investments, that type of behavior gets weeded out. So I don't know that the trend's going to go away. You're always going to have bad actors. I'm hoping there is a new trend, at least in the space now that I find myself in, fintech, where, you know, we're sticking to the outcomes, what's of benefit for the consumer. You know, again, I cited some of the metrics, but I think over time, if you're doing the right things with authenticity, you know, the inefficiencies in the market will play out.
Yeah, I think I'd just build on that and just say that I mean, the trend has always been that the customer is in control, and that has never been more elevated than now, which makes, I think, being a marketer so fun because you can't kind of fake your way into a customer's heart anymore. So the capability that we have with data and analytics to target the right message at the right time is intoxicating, but the responsibility that comes with that is kind of where that dovetails really nicely with our partners in compliance. So we don't want to get called out because we can so easily. So I think that's only going to, the expectations are only going to get higher and higher. And so I see that trend being kind of ever present.
So Jane, if we look at it kind of from the other direction, I'm starting to hear buzzwords like compliance is the advisor to the business and like all these like fun, interesting ways of spinning this. What's your take on what's going on and how these things are colliding?
Sure, so I should say I've only been at Uber for 7 months. Just lay that out there. So some of what I'm going to talk about is what I did at my prior job, which was at Citi. I think legal, we always see ourselves as a trusted advisor of the business, and we always want to partner with the business. At Uber, yes, part of my job is working very closely with the marketing team to make sure we're compliant. We have a big FTC consent order that we entered into last year, which may be why I was hired. So, those are important. At the same token, there's also what I think of as marketing activation, which is we have marketers who have amazing ideas and ways that they want to build customer loyalty and really get the brand message across, and we're there to support those too. Whether it be a big sponsorship and how you activate that, whether it be a completely new kind of tactic in digital space that we haven't used before. We're there to help partner with the business and help kind of get that out there. When I was at Citi, I worked on a project that was probably my favorite thing that I've ever worked on, and it was very controversial at Citi in the beginning, and I worked so closely with the business, and I think the Citi Bike program has been a pretty big success, and that was one where we partnered from day one. So, cool.
So, what advice would you have for the audience about how to work with legal and compliance departments in this new normal?
And look, I think that legal and compliance take the responsibility too. This should not be an adversarial relationship. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work well for the marketing folks, and frankly, it doesn't work well for the legal folks. We want to be part of the team. We all have a vested interest in the companies that we work for being successful. So I would say early engagement is really important. A lot of places I find when we get brought in at the briefing stage, when you're briefing the agencies, if you're working with the agency or if you're creating the internal creative brief, have a quick convo with legal or compliance. Just quickly. It doesn't need to be a huge part of the process, but I think that really helps. I think also just the more, and I say this to my legal and compliance colleagues especially, the more you can be out in front of the business as we're here and we're here to support you and we're going to have a conversation when you need to have a conversation and be available, that's great. I think there's too much, particularly right now, that's done online over chat or over email, and I think just those in-person or phone conversations really, really help, because otherwise I think we become legal or compliance, and that's not great.
Yeah, I mean, can I build on that and just say,
Yeah.
So I've been at TD Ameritrade for 8 years, and when I first got there, adversarial with a capital A, and I wasn't a very good leader in that time either, because I knew that the way we were running the show, it was everything with compliance and legal was slowing us down, and we would absolutely intentionally bring them in at the last minute, which only then fostered more of an adversarial relationship. The way things have sped up and the way we have to work together has forced that partnership, and I have matured as a leader to understand that, my God, we're so much more effective as a department when you bring them in very early. And actually, like I'm sure you've talked about over the last couple of days, it does speed things up. Build that partnership up front. And I found it's very important for people to see that the leaders demonstrate that too, so that they're not going around complaining about how long things are taking. They're actually excited to bring these partners in at the very beginning. So I do that. If I'm going to RFP an agency, I bring compliance and legal with me on the RFP to the agencies. And I always say marketing's the best job in the building. Give these guys a break. Bring them over to the agency, show them a little fun, show them a little bit of your world, and it actually helps really solidify the partnership too.
Okay, I can't help myself. I think we've all been around the block a little bit. There's a little bit of a gas pedal and a brake pedal thing going on here. can we get real about it for a moment? I know that the marketing people are saying stuff about the compliance people, and the compliance people are saying stuff about the marketing people. So I'd love. I'm gonna let Jane go first here. What are the kind of behind the scenes? What are the compliance people really saying about the marketing people?
So, look, I mean, honestly, I'm seeing former clients of mine who are marketers while I'm here in town for the week.
Yeah.
So I had a great relationship with them and really enjoyed working with them. I think occasionally there's a little frustration when you hear we need your sign off in the next half an hour, and this is going live. And or I love it when they're like, so we're just gonna do a surprise giveaway of tickets for the Warriors, and the message is just gonna be win tickets, because it's a surprise giveaway, and win them tomorrow. I'm like, but it's not a surprise giveaway if you're talking about when it's a sweepstakes, and where are your official rules, and the 110 questions that you ask, and do we have a deal with the Warriors so we can mention their name? That is just a made-up example that never happened. So those things are tough, right? And I think at that point, there's I wish I had an office still so that I could bang my head on my desk. But honestly, we do really like working with the marketing teams. I mean, you guys do really cool work, and we're lawyers. So of course we're gonna like it. And I think that's it. I do think when we feel like we're part of the team, when we are brought in early, first off, it makes us want to work really hard for the team. It's you want to, those are the people that have my cell phone number and they know how to use it. Mm-hmm. And you will do those really quick turnarounds because you know that they're in this with you and they feel like you're part of it. So I really do think if the relationship can get off to that right start, it's great. And now I have people who, at Uber will bring me in on stuff that's not necessarily even in my area, but that's sure, happy to help.
How many folks in the room are marketers? All right, because I think she just dropped some wisdom on how to get stuff done faster. So just write that one down. All right, your turn. What are the marketing folks saying about what's going on in compliance and legal these days?
You want to go first? Or?
I'll just give a quick one. I think sometimes we think we're being really cute by bringing our competitors' ads into, marching into the compliance office and say, look, they're being promissory, like E-Trade. Why can't so we can do it too? And what they'll say is, oh, we'll call right now and do a cease and desist. I'm like, no, that's not the point.
I think even better
We're right.
is when people will say, oh, look, they're doing it. And we're like, uh-huh. And then, all of a sudden, 3 weeks later, the ads are changed. We found out that party may be under CFPB investigation.
Yeah. So I think our tactics are wrong. We've proven that. But I would say the only thing for me is it's the inconsistency sometimes with people. Something's okay one day, and the next day it may not be okay. And I just think for our personal issues, I think consistency is key.
I've been really lucky. I think, in all sincerity, when you asked the question early on, there's really, I don't have much of an adversarial relationship. It is funny though. I wish everyone could see the gentleman I work with. He's this probably 5'8", 5'9", bald gentleman from Alabama, and I'll start with a request into the office, and before I even get out the sentence, he'll just give me the Alabama no before I can get anything out. So I call him the Alabama Dr. No. But in all sincerity, because our motivations and incentives are aligned up front, going back to sort of the long-term health of the business, we rarely find ourselves in a dispute situation. I do want to go back to your earlier question, though, around maybe some advice, and the two are a bit related, but so much what we do are around the trade-off between a short-term incentive versus a long-term economic signal. And that's a tough thing, right? Particularly if you're a public company. So what I found to be really, really effective in these situations is not just have a relationship between, say, legal, compliance, and marketing, pull in a CFO as well. I think that triad makes a really remarkable situation, because when you get in those sort of conflict areas, you can have a third person and a third party also have a point of view on the business.
Okay, so while you're there and you're stuck, you made a really good point about Dr. No. everybody here works with somebody in some capacity that just always comes from a place of no. Everybody with me on this one? We all have them. What do you do? How do you break that cycle of coming from the place of no? And what advice do you have for the compliance folks out there to get into the insight of where the marketer is coming from, and how do we break this, this place of no?
For me, what's been effective, ultimately it's data at the end of the day, right? So whether it's a language piece on the hook to pull people on the site, or whether it's T's and C's or what have you, data will rule the day. Now, you still have to test your way into that data. But I think that's the beauty, at least of our business, being very direct to consumer and B2C. You can take a portion of traffic and still test it out. So I think it's been relatively easy in the businesses I've been in, and certainly the business I'm in now, where we can test these ideals, and you try to get to the end kind of economic benefit or metric that's good for, in our case, a lender network or a consumer.
And so Jane, I'll go back to some of the wisdom you were dropping earlier. How can the marketers approach legal and compliance folks and break that cycle of no? What are some things that they can do to be more effective?
I think laying out their objectives is really helpful, because I think sometimes there might be a legitimate issue with the tactic, but if we know what the objectives are, we can perhaps say, oh, if you tweak it, or if you do something where you go this way instead of that way, meets your objectives ideally, right? And it's a yes, right? I think sometimes that's why I think the more information that is given to the legal folks and the compliance folks, the better it is. And look, I will say, for legal and compliance folks out there in the audience, it shouldn't always be no. I think you really need to listen to the business and what they're doing and understand, what risks. In some cases, maybe the answer is, this is risky, but what are legal risks where it's no, and we have to figure out a way to deal, and what are business risks where it might end up costing you more money at the end, but that is a decision that the right level of executive can make, and having that escalation. But I do think information is critical, and I think that it's helpful.
So Denise, finance is not known for its speed nor its over-exuberant creativity.
Thank you.
So there's a question in here someplace. So you guys have managed to do a little bit of both. And I'm going to get to some creativity here in a little bit. But for now, I'd love to hear what you think is going to create the winners and the losers out of this. Some companies are going to get this right, and they're going to figure out how to ride the tandem bicycle, and others just aren't. So what do you think are the characteristics that companies are going to have to deal with, and what's going to separate the winners and the losers here?
Sure. I think Jane's dead on that. The old school paradigms of having these separate, divisions where it's legal and compliance over here and marketing over here, that's no more. So we can get an ad up and down in an hour and approved and out the door, so that when something's happening in the news or the markets are moving, we can let our clients and our prospects know, and we can give it contextual information for them so that they can actually start trading. We've been doing that for about 4 years. And that's unheard of without the partnership that we have with legal and compliance, but it's a competitive differentiator. And I think bringing people into the vision that we have to be a real-time marketing company was the first starting point for that. So I think breaking down the old school thinking of silos, not realizing you cannot be an effective marketer without the entire team. It's a team sport, to say the least. I think those are certainly going to be the winners. And then I think just because of the complexity of the environment, I move like crazy fast, and I know that's a strength and a weakness. And so I surround myself with people to slow me down, to make me think through things, and that's both within the marketing department and my partners across the company, because I know that in this day and age, if I don't have someone thinking about all of the possible ramifications, I'm going to get myself and my team in trouble.
So for each of you, if you had one wish that you could give, that you could make either for your team or for your cross-functional partners, to get them to be more effective collectively, what would that be? See, this wasn't in the pre-briefing notes.
Yes.
On purpose.
Yeah.
No, that's okay.
For me-
I would say shared risk tolerance, right?
Yeah.
I think that's probably where there's a bit of a divide, and I think talking through the risks and talking about what we're trying to achieve, and then how can we get to a level playing field, I think is something that would be perfect harmony.
I'd say authenticity of purpose, which shared risk tolerance is probably underneath that. So I think if you're all aligned on what the purpose and the mission of the brand is, the experience you're trying to create, the outcomes you're trying to derive, I think everything else falls in place.
Jane, anything?
Yeah, I agree. And I would also the only thing I would add to what Denise said, because I think that's right on target, is also clear decision makers. Particularly on the business side, I think sometimes the folks who bring things to legal and compliance aren't necessarily the ones who should be empowered to make some of those decisions. And so I think just knowing what that path is helpful too.
Okay, so everybody's working together great. The wishes have all come true. We've all learned a lot over the course of the last several years. Are there marketing channels that you guys are actively avoiding, or that you're recommending that folks actively avoid? Like, how has your thought about channels changed?
We're not actively avoiding anything. I think if you go back to a bit of the theme of what I've been expressing here, which is if you only live in the world of short-term economic gain, I think you're going to find yourself, and by the way, I think this is a very real thing we're not only seeing in our industry, but even for our brand, which has certainly been high growth, but certainly maturing. I think if you're only in that world of economic gain, you tend to find yourself strictly on kind of the shelf channels, search engine marketing, affiliate marketing, partner marketing. I think if you are going for a bigger authenticity of purpose, and you're trying to get a certain set of customers, and you're trying to explain away very complex products, I think ultimately over time you start to go to upper funnel type of mediums, and/or mediums that have far better content and trust in targeting. So I think for us, what we've seen is the tilt to certainly more TV, certainly more social media, and content marketing, where we actually have the ability to target, and also when we pull them in, we can explain away the content versus just say sort of native content advertising. So that's the tilt we've seen.
Yeah, I'd say we certainly have pulled ourselves away from channels when like with YouTube is having its problems, and being very vocal with our media properties to say here's why, and I'm sure we're not alone. So if there's something that's a black and white issue, then we would move away from properties like that. I think it's when it's less black and white, and you're hearing in social media us getting disparaged for advertising on Fox, and then we're getting lauded for advertising on Fox. So it's like you cannot win, and that's where I think having guiding principles as to what's in bounds, what's out of bounds from a channel selection perspective really becomes critical. And it's hard because, if you put every single lightning rod issue on a piece of paper, it's a pad of paper. There's a lot of things out there right now. So it's a lot easier for us to pull our dollars when it's black and white, and you understand that. And it's a lot harder when you have people complaining about just, based on their subjectivity. That's when we don't make those choices. So
it used to be you'd get criticized for the creative of the communications. Now you get criticized for all the mediums
Yeah,
what you
exactly.
advertise.
it's true. Mm-hmm.
I would leave that to the marketing team, but I think it's been interesting just to read, particularly like last year, the idea of companies that were now, instead of just blacklisting sites, actually doing whitelisting for all of their buys. And I just think people should be educated on what's going on, and also like, what is the FTC saying? What are other regulators saying? What are the channels that are getting the most attention? So knowing what the restrictions and the rules of the road are important.
Blacklisting, whitelisting is a good segue. What's technology's role here?
In terms of?
You can take that wherever you want to go. What role do you expect to see from technology in helping you effectively market and/or stay within compliance?
Well, on our side,
Yeah.
we try to do, as I mentioned up front, I think we're paring back just by nature of the outcomes we're trying to get and the purpose of what we're trying to do for our brand. So I think under that, those things under themselves lead you to pare back. I think internally now we're building the data environment such that we start to understand signals that help us go back out to other either mass mediums or targeted mediums to make sure that we're getting the right set of customers. So I think for us, it's it's funny how often you guys get criticized as well as Google, but I think it's incumbent upon the brands to build a lot of the technology. Oh, in fairness, it's incumbent upon the brands to build a lot of that technology itself as well and partner with you guys to be better. So I think a lot of the technology we're certainly trying to build within to make sure that we are, so I just subscribe to this philosophy of collect, segment, align, respond. So we're trying to build a collection march. I know that scares probably the compliance side, but we're using it responsibly to make sure that we're segmenting and scoring in the right capacity so that we can go back out and advertise in the right places.
Yeah.
Anything, anybody?
I mean, he was so articulate. So.
All right. So mentioned earlier a little bit about creativity. I was cruising through my news feed, and I got a little update from a friend's feed with a very cool ad in it that was in a blockchain. And I don't pay attention to a lot of kind of traditionally gimmicky things, but this was so well done and very clever that I stopped. I shared it. I even tweeted it. And it was the TD Ameritrade blockchain ad.
Yes.
And then in the brief time that we've known each other, there's a story here. Would you mind sharing it?
Yeah, I would love to. So, it's like getting your gold medal recalled. I was so proud of the team. We came up with this idea, not going to be a business driver, but just going to be a really cool thing for TD Ameritrade to be able to say to its associates and on social media that we actually were the first company to place an ad in the blockchain. And we really thought that was true. And we were wrong. After my CEO told the board and the street. So the story there is that the teams did an incredible amount of due diligence because I was all over them to say, like, it's okay if we can't say first. It's still cool. Like, no, we can say first. Are you sure? How do you know? It's the blockchain. Who understands the blockchain? Are you sure? Are you sure we're first? We're sure. We're sure. Reams of back and forth writing. And the process, so what happened was someone tweeted at my CEO saying, very cool, and they were very polite, but you weren't the first. Here's Uber, here's a bunch of other brands that have 3 years ago, in fact, were advertising the blockchain. And so what happened was that the teams knew all of that. And this is the agency and my team. They knew all of that, but they didn't count it as an ad because it was text, it was an offer, it was considered spam, it wasn't ASCII art, it was a different construct. And it really kind of, according to the creatives, it wasn't true advertising, it was spam. So they disqualified it. And so I said, but compliance approved it. Like, that's my air cover, compliance approved it. And so, and my CEO said to me, but you're putting that burden on compliance to understand advertising the blockchain when you don't even understand it? And it was a wonderful example of how if it takes 3 pages to explain why we thought we were the first, you're never going to be able to respond to that in social media, by the way. I can't claim that now. I just have to apologize. And the rationale and justification that we used to sway compliance to approve the claim of first was then used against us. So shame on us for putting the burden on the system to be able to make that claim when in fact it came back to bite us. So,
well, for what it's worth, whether you were first, third, or wherever, it was very cool.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Yeah. Thank you all, and thank you all.
Yeah, thank you, David. Yeah, thank you.